When reading about Henry VIII and the Tudor court during 16th century in England, well, you read a lot about the names, you might read a lot about the people, but at the same time, for me, it's difficult to picture those people in my mind. And Hans Holbein the Younger, he was an artist in Henry VIII's court, and he painted or drew so many sketches and painted so many portraits that he helps to give an insight into what that person actually looked like. So when you start reading about Henry VIII or Anne Boleyn or Jane Seymour, but also others like Charles Brandon, if you learn about the Duke of Norfolk, just different people, Mary Howard, Henry Fitzroy. As I'm saying all these names to you, do any images come to your mind? Do you think of if Thomas Cromwell, was he tall, was he short, was he heavy set, was he skinny? Who's to say, because you might read about what a person did or was said to have done, but you may not really be able to picture if they were blonde or brunette, if they had a big nose, just certain things. And that's where I think Hans Holbein the Younger, with his amazing ability, was able to capture what a person looked like, either just with a simple sketch or with his completed portraits. And that's what I want to show you today, is just going over not only kind of the who's who. So say you were somehow transported back in time and went and stepped into one of the palaces in Henry VIII's court, and you walked into a room and you saw a whole bunch of people. Not only would you be able to look at the portraits that Holbein painted and be able to look around the room and go, ooh, that's that person, but also I want to give you some information when I show you the person's portrait, a little more insight into who that person was. Who was their father, who was their cousin, who was their spouse or their child, because you will start to learn as you see these portraits. Because originally what I wanted to do was have everything kind of in order and have it set to where I could show you the early portraits that Hans Holbein the Younger painted, and then work my way through the years in a chronological order. However, I found that that would be more confusing. And so instead what I've done is I have grouped together the portraits to kind of show you who was related to who. So I might show you a portrait and tell you about this person. And then here is what happened to their brother, who then was married to this person, who was cousin to that person. And then you start to see the inner workings of how, with court life, how there were different factions where, like, you might have the Boleyns who were attached to the Howards, but then over here you have the Seymours and who they were attached with, and then who was married to who as far as where your alliances laid. And so that's what I'd like to show you today.
Hans Holbein the Younger was born in 1497 in Augsburg, Germany. He was the son of Hans Holbein the Elder, who was also a famous painter, whose works included the St. Catherine altar from 1512, the St. Sebastian altar from 1516, and the Fountain of Life from 1519. Holbein the Younger first started painting with his father and older brother Ambrosius. In 1526, Hans the Younger went to England with a recommendation from Erasmus. In 1528, he had to return home to Switzerland, but in 1532, he returned to England, leaving behind his wife and children. He officially entered into the service of King Henry VIII of England in 1537, and it's believed that he painted over 150 portraits during his lifetime in England. This is just a glimpse into some of the lives that he had encountered. When studying the portraits and sketches that Holbein the Younger created, these portraits appear so lifelike, making it seem like the person in the portrait is simply sitting on the other side of the frame. It's interesting to put a face with a name to have an idea of what a person looked like and how they helped to shape their part of history. One of the first portraits that Holbein painted in England was the family portrait of Sir Thomas More, along with his household, from about 1527. Holbein's original painting was destroyed in a fire in 1752. However, there is a copy of this family portrait painted by Roland Locke in 1592, which can be found at the Nostell Priory. From left to right, first there is Margaret Giggs, aged 22, the foster daughter to Sir Thomas More. She was an adopted daughter and kinswoman, a scholar in Greek, Latin, mathematics, and medicine. She married John Clement in 1526, who later became court physician in 1528 and later president of the London College of Physicians. She was the only family member at More's execution. She died on July 6, 1570, 35 years to the day of More's death. She served as a co-editor of More's English works. Next to Margaret is Elizabeth More, the second daughter of Sir Thomas More. She married William Dauncey, son of Sir John Dauncey, Knight of the Body to Henry VIII, and would be parents to 7 children. John, the eldest and heir, was born in 1526, followed by Thomas, Bartholomew, William, Germain, Alice, and Elizabeth. Sitting next to Elizabeth is Sir John More, age 76 in this portrait. Sir John was a barrister, sergeant at law, judge of common pleas, and the King's Bench. He married 4 times. Thomas was the second child of 6 from John's first marriage to Agnes Granger. Agnes was the daughter of Thomas Granger, who was alderman of London and a merchant of the staple of Calais. She died in 1499. Standing behind Sir John is Anne Cressaker, who was 15 when this portrait was painted, and she was the wife of John More, Sir Thomas More's son. She became the ward of Sir Thomas More in 1512 and married John in 1529. They had 8 children together. Their son Thomas More II was born in 1531. Anne moved to her estate in Yorkshire after John's death in 1547 and later married neighbor George West. Thomas More II inherited the estate in 1572. Sitting next to Sir John is Sir Thomas More, age 50. He was born in Cheapside in February 1478. His first wife was Joanna Colt, married in January 1505. She was the mother of all of his children, but then she died in 1511. Sir Thomas quickly remarried, this time to Alice Middleton, the widow of John Middleton. He was knighted by Henry VIII in May 1521. The More family moved from London to Chelsea in 1524. In December 1526, Holbein arrived from Antwerp to the More home and stayed through early 1527. Sir Thomas was Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster when this portrait was made in 1527. More became Lord Chancellor of England in October of 1529. He was later executed on July 6, 1535. To Sir Thomas's left is his son, John More, age 19. He was More's youngest child and only son. He married Anne Cressaker in 1529. In 1543, he was imprisoned, but subsequently pardoned and released. He died young at the age of 39. Standing next to John is Henry Pattinson, the family fool. Dressed like King Henry VIII, he has a red and white Tudor rose on his cap, has a red beard, and wears a play sword. Sitting in front of Henry is Cecily Heron, age 20. In Holbein's preparatory sketch, Cecily is holding a rosary. Like her 2 sisters, she is pregnant in the family portrait. The youngest and most beautiful of More's 3 daughters, she married in 1525 to Giles Heron, the wealthy heir of Sir John Heron, treasurer of the Chamber of Henry VIII. Giles had been More's ward from 1522 to 1525, but in later years, More gave a judgment against him in court. Giles was a member of Parliament, but was later attainted by Parliament for treason in August 1540. He was then drawn, hung, and quartered, his lands going to Cromwell and Rich. Next to Cecily is Margaret More, age 22. Commonly known as Meg, she was the oldest of More's children and the most intellectually accomplished. She was the first non-royal woman to publish a book in England. She was proficient in Greek, Latin, medicine, and liberal learning. She married lawyer William Roper in July 1521 and was the mother of 5 children, Margaret, Elizabeth, Mary, Thomas, and Anthony. And she died at the age of 39 in 1544. Like her 2 younger sisters, she is pregnant in the family portrait. Behind Margaret is Lady Alice, age 57. She was related to the families of both Henry VII and Henry VIII and is the grandmother, 9 generations removed, of Queen Elizabeth II. She was a widow when she married Sir Thomas in 1511. She had married around 1490 to John Middleton, a wealthy London merchant and member of the Mercers Company, which More had served. She died in 1551. The same year that Holbein painted the More family portrait, he also painted a portrait of Sir Henry Guildford and a separate companion portrait of his wife, Lady Mary. Born in 1489, Guildford was one of Henry VIII's closest friends. On the king's accession in 1509, he was appointed Esquire of the Body, who was a personal attendant on the king and master of revels, responsible for organizing the lavish entertainments at court. His parties included Morris dancers, moving stages, and a series of elaborate costumes for the young king. Guildford's influence at court was cut short in the 1519 purge of the so-called minions, an attempt by older statesmen to limit the influence of hot-headed young men on the 28-year-old monarch. Guildford soon returned to court, however, and developed a distinguished career as controller of the royal household, as seen in this portrait with him holding the white staff of the office. In 1526, he was elected to the Order of the Garter. In his continuing support of Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, he made a dangerous enemy of the king's mistress, Anne Boleyn, who later became Henry VIII's second wife. And it is a mark of his friendship with Henry that he remained in his post until his death in 1532. Guildford was a keen scholar as well as an experienced courtier, and his humanist interests may have drawn him to Hans Holbein. The two almost certainly worked together in the planning of the revels at Greenwich in 1527 to receive an embassy sent by Francis I to mark a peace accord between France and England, when a Master Hans carried out much of the decorative painting. Guildford was one of the first in England to commission a portrait from Holbein. Both the preparatory drawing and the finished oil painting survive. Lady Mary Guildford was born Mary Wotton around 1499 and became Sir Henry Guildford's second wife in 1525. After Sir Henry died in 1532, Lady Mary married Sir Gawain Carew and became close to the king's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. Part of a prominent family, her father, Robert Wotton, had been a previous controller of the royal household and a Garter Knight. Her brother Nicholas was a diplomat and served Queen Mary Tudor as ambassador to France. Mary Wotton's sister became Marchioness of Dorset at her marriage and later Duchess of Suffolk. Sir Gawain Carew, the second husband to Lady Mary Guildford, was born about 1503 and had been married 3 times. His first wife was Anne Brandon, who was sister to Charles Brandon. Charles Brandon was the first Duke of Suffolk and became a brother-in-law to Henry VIII through his third wife, Mary Tudor, one of Henry VIII's sisters. Carew was a member of Parliament and died in 1585. Gawain's brother was Sir George Carew, born in 1504. Sir George is best known as the Admiral of the Mary Rose on the day she sank on July 19, 1545. Henry VIII had put him in charge of the Mary Rose just the day before on July 18th. He had previously served as a member of Parliament for Devon in 1529 and later in 1536 and 1542 as High Sheriff of Devon, plus commanding rice bank fort in 1539. However, he had also been implicated in conspiracies against the English crown both in 1532 and 1540, the latter resulting in his being questioned at the Tower of London before eventually being pardoned. He died in 1545. Another Carew from Henry VIII's court was Sir Nicholas Carew. It is believed that he was born by 1496 to Sir Richard Carew of Beddington. In May 1511, he was made a groom of the Privy Chamber. In 1513, he was associated with his father in a grant from the Crown for the office of Lieutenant of Calais Castle. In that same year, Henry VIII decided to invade France with an army of 30,000 men, which included Carew. The following year, in 1514, Carew married Elizabeth, daughter of Sir Thomas Bryan of Ashbridge, Vice-Chamberlain to Queen Catherine of Aragon. Elizabeth was a first half-cousin to Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, the second and fifth wives of Henry VIII. The couple were granted lands of Wallington, Carshalton, Beddington, Woodmansterne, Woodcote, and Mitcham in Surrey upon their marriage. Nicholas and Elizabeth had one son, Francis, and 4 daughters, Elizabeth, Mary, Anne, and Isabel. By 1515, Nicholas was recorded as being a squire to Henry VIII and one of the king's cupbearers, being granted 30 marks per year. On the 7th of July, 1517, Nicholas was recorded as a knight who attended the ambassadors of the future Charles V at a banquet. On December 18th, Carew was also recorded as a knight when he was appointed keeper of the manor in East Greenwich and of the accompanying park. In addition to being knighted, in 1518, Carew had the distinction of being appointed a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. In Christmas 1521, Carew had the high honor of being appointed as the king's carver. On July 18, 1522, Carew was appointed as Master of the Horse, one of the 3 highest positions at court. He was also granted the manor of Braisted in Kent, which had formerly belonged to the Duke of Buckingham, and the manor of Bletchingley in Surrey. On St. George's Day, April 23, 1536, Carew was appointed to the Order of the Garter, as Francis I of France had asked Henry VIII to bestow the Order of the Garter, the highest order of chivalry in England, to Carew due to his service and his being highly favored by Francis. Carew was installed into the Order of the Garter on May 21, 1537, at the Order's feast. He also attended the christening of Henry VIII's longed-for son and heir, Edward, in October 1537. In November, Henry Pole, Baron Montague, and Henry Courtenay, the Marquis of Exeter, were arrested and taken to the Tower of London. They were charged with treason for corresponding with Cardinal Reginald Pole, Montague's brother and an enemy of Henry VIII, for wishing to see a change in the kingdom. Early the following year, Carew was arrested, then tried on February 14, 1539. At his trial, Carew was accused of corresponding with Montague and hiding Montague's traitorous plans, as well as wishing for a change in the realm. The letters that passed between Carew and Montague were allegedly burned, and the evidence against Carew was flimsy at best. He was still sentenced to death. Sir Nicholas Carew was beheaded on Tower Hill on March 8, 1539. William Warham was born around 1450. He was the last of the pre-Reformation archbishops in Canterbury. He was ordained priest in 1493, became Bishop of London and Keeper of the Great Seal in 1502, and in January 1504 was made Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Chancellor. However, in 1515, he surrendered the chancellorship to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. After presiding submissively over the convocation in 1531 that declared Henry to be the head of the church in England, Warham bravely published in 1532, in February, a dignified but emphatic protest against the enactments of the Reformation Parliament from 1529. He soon died thereafter on August 22, 1532. One cannot talk about the Tudor period without mentioning King Henry VIII himself. He was the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. He was born in June 1491. He became king in April 1509. He famously married his deceased brother's wife, Catherine of Aragon, which led into the Great Matter after 20 years of marriage and only one surviving daughter. In his desperate attempt to have more sons, Henry married 5 more women. There is a phrase associated with these ladies: divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived. Henry VIII then died on January in 1547. Anne Boleyn was born to Thomas Boleyn and Elizabeth Howard around 1501. Thomas Boleyn would later become the first Earl of Wiltshire. Anne was the second wife of Henry VIII. She had 2 siblings, Mary and George. She and Henry had one daughter, who would later become Queen Elizabeth I. Anne was charged with treason due to alleged adultery and was beheaded at the Tower of London on May 19, 1536. Thomas Cromwell was born around 1405 to lowly beginnings, with his father being reported as a sheep farmer or a blacksmith. Around 1515, he married Elizabeth Wykes. They had 3 children together, including a son, Gregory Cromwell. By 1520, he was a solicitor to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. When Wolsey fell into disgrace in 1529, Cromwell entered Parliament. In 1532, he obtained office as Master of the Jewels. Other offices soon followed, like Principal Secretary and Master of the Rolls in 1534, and the Lord Privy Seal in 1536. This last office was combined with a peerage, and he took the title of Lord Cromwell of Wimbledon. After the failure of Henry VIII's 4th marriage, Wolsey was arrested for treason and executed on July 28, 1540. Jane Seymour was born to Sir John Seymour and Marjorie Wentworth around 1508. She was the 3rd wife of Henry VIII. Through her maternal grandfather, she was a descendant of King Edward III's son Lionel of Antwerp, 1st Duke of Clarence. Because of this, she and King Henry VIII were 5th cousins. She also shared a great-grandmother, Elizabeth Cheney, with his 2nd and 5th wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Jane had many siblings, including Edward, who would later become 1st Duke of Somerset, Sir Henry, Sir Thomas, who would later become 1st Baron Seymour of Sibley, and Elizabeth, who would later marry Gregory Cromwell, son of Henry VIII's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, 1st Earl of Essex. Jane and Henry had one son together, who would later become King Edward VI. Jane died on October 24, 1537, at Hampton Court, shortly after Edward's birth. Edward, Prince of Wales, was born on October 12, 1537. He became King Edward VI on January 28, 1547. The first Lord Protector was his maternal uncle, Edward, 1st Duke of Somerset. His second Lord Protector was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. He had 2 half-sisters, Mary, from Henry VIII's first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth, from Henry VIII's second marriage to Anne Boleyn. Edward died at the age of 15 on July 6, 1553, at Greenwich Palace. Mary, the half-sister to Edward VI, was born on February 18, 1516, to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She was named Princess of Wales in 1525. However, this title was later stripped from her when her father divorced her mother, and she was removed from the line of succession. Some years later, after the birth of Edward, she was reinstated into the line of succession. Aside from having Edward and Elizabeth as siblings, she also had a half-brother, Henry Fitzroy. After Edward's death, she became Queen Mary I. She married Philip II of Spain. While trying to change England from a Protestant nation back to a Catholic nation, she earned the nickname Bloody Mary. She died on November 17, 1558, at St. James's Palace. Henry Fitzroy was the only acknowledged illegitimate child of Henry VIII. His mother was Elizabeth Blount, but was more commonly known as Bessie Blount. Henry Fitzroy was born on June 15, 1519. In 1525, he was appointed Knight of the Garter and made Duke of Richmond and Somerset. In 1534, he married Mary Howard, the daughter of Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Henry died of probably tuberculosis, and he died on July 23, 1536. Mary Fitzroy was born Mary Howard in 1519 to Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, and Elizabeth Howard. Her siblings included Henry, who later became the Earl of Surrey, and Thomas, who later became the 1st Viscount Howard of Biden. At the time of her birth, her father was the 3rd highest-ranking and most powerful nobleman in England. Her grandfathers, Thomas Howard, the 2nd Duke of Norfolk, and Edward Stafford, 3rd Duke of Buckingham, were the most powerful peers in the kingdom. Her father, Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, was uncle to Anne Boleyn, the 2nd wife of Henry VIII, and Catherine Howard, 5th wife of Henry VIII. Mary married Henry Fitzroy in 1534 and therefore became daughter-in-law to Henry VIII. Since the marriage was not consummated, she did not get to keep many of the lands that would have been entitled to a widow when her husband died. Later in 1542, when her cousin Catherine Howard was demoted from being Queen of England, Mary and her family were arrested and briefly imprisoned in the Tower of London. After their release, her father petitioned Henry VIII for Mary to marry Thomas Seymour, a brother to Henry VIII's third wife, Jane. However, she never remarried and later died in December of 1557. Henry Howard was born in 1517, the eldest son of Lord Thomas Howard. Henry took the courtesy title of Earl of Surrey in 1524 when his father succeeded him as 3rd Duke of Norfolk. From 1530 until 1532, he lived at Windsor with his father's ward, Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond. In April 1532, he married Lady Frances de Vere, the 14-year-old daughter of the Earl of Oxford, but they did not live together until 1535. Surrey was confined at Windsor from 1537 to 1539 after being charged by the Seymours, who were high in favor since the king's marriage to Jane Seymour in 1536, and he was charged with having secretly favored the Roman Catholics in the rebellion of 1536. He served on campaign in France and Flanders from 1543 to 1546. Then, due to accusations of treason by the Seymours, he was executed at the age of 30 on Tower Hill on January 13, 1547. Frances de Vere was born in 1517. She was the daughter of John de Vere, the 15th Earl of Oxford. In April 1532, she married Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey. The Howards and the de Vere families were repeatedly intertwined and had fought on different sides during the Wars of the Roses, with the de Vere family supporting the Lancastrians and the Howards backing the Yorkists. In 1536, Frances was one of the chief mourners in the funeral of Catherine of Aragon. Frances and Henry had 5 children together, including Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk. Henry was the last man to be executed by Henry VIII before his death. Shortly after her husband's death, Frances gave birth to their 5th child, Margaret. Her children were taken from her and placed in the care of Sir John Williams in the case of her eldest son, and in the care of Lord Wentworth in the case of her 4 younger ones. 1 year later, Jane, Thomas, Henry, Catherine, and Margaret were allowed to live reunited under their aunt Mary Fitzroy, Henry's sister. In 1553, Frances remarried, this time to Thomas Steining. She died on June 30th, 1577. Thomas Wyatt was born in 1503. He was a poet and a politician. He was knighted in 1535. He was rumored to have had an affair with Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. He was arrested and imprisoned in 1536. He survived, but was arrested again in 1541 after the execution of his ally, Thomas Cromwell. His son, Thomas, is known for Wyatt's Rebellion, which happened in 1554. Sir Thomas died on October 11th, 1542. Edward Vines was born the son of Thomas Clinton, 8th Baron Clinton, in 1512. Edward succeeded his father as 9th Baron Clinton in 1517. As he was only 5 years old when his father died, he was made a royal ward in the Court of Wards. In 1530, he had been married to the king's former mistress, the 30-year-old Elizabeth Blount, also known as Bessie Blount, making him the stepfather to Henry Fitzroy, the illegitimate son of Henry VIII. With Bessie, he had 3 daughters. After Bessie died in 1539, Edward remarried, this time to Ursula Stourton, daughter of William Stourton, 7th Baron Stourton. He had 5 children with Ursula, including Henry Clinton, the 2nd Earl of Lincoln. He held various offices, including the Governor of Boulogne in 1547. He then married a 3rd time in 1552 and then died on January 16, 1585. Catherine Brandon was born Catherine Willoughby in March 1519. She was the daughter and heir of William Willoughby, Baron Willoughby, and his Spanish wife Maria de Salinas, who probably traveled to England with Catherine of Aragon in 1501. Her father died in 1526, and Catherine inherited his extensive Lincolnshire estates. In 1529, she became the ward of Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, who sought to expand his East Anglian power base through her inheritance. To this end, Brandon, who was about 35 years older than her, married Catherine as his 4th wife in 1533. She became the mother of his 2 sons, Henry and Charles, both of whom were the subject of portrait miniatures painted by Holbein. The miniatures are dated 1541, and this drawing may have been made in that same year when Catherine was 22 years old. It is possible that it was also preparatory for a miniature. Charles died in August 1545. Catherine then went on to marry Richard Bertie, and then she died on September 19, 1580. Mary Brandon was born in 1510 to Charles Brandon, 1st Duke of Suffolk, and his 2nd wife, Anne Brown. After her mother died, her father married Mary Tudor, sister to King Henry VIII. Her half-siblings through this marriage included Henry Brandon, 1st Earl of Lincoln, and Lady Frances Brandon. Mary married Thomas Stanley, the 2nd Lord Monteagle. She was a lady-in-waiting to Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's 3rd wife. She then died prior to 1544. Margaret Wotton, sister to Mary Wotton, was the Marchioness of Dorset and the 2nd wife of Thomas Grey, the 2nd Marquess of Dorset. Margaret was born in 1485. She and Thomas married in 1509. They had many children together, including Henry Grey, the 1st Duke of Suffolk, and Elizabeth Grey. Margaret first began a long series of quarrels with her son, who succeeded to the Marquess of Dorset in 1530, when he was forced to pay a fine of £4,000 for breach of contract after he had renounced his betrothal to Catherine Fitzalan, daughter of the Earl of Arundel. As a result, Margaret tried to restrict his allowance throughout his minority, which caused much consternation from her peers, who labeled her actions unmotherly. In 1533, she agreed to Henry's marriage with Lady Frances Brandon, niece of the king, on the condition that her father, Charles Brandon, the 1st Duke of Suffolk, would support the couple until her son reached his majority. On September 10, 1533, she stood as one of the godmothers of the future Queen Elizabeth I of England, and then in 1541 she died. Elizabeth Grey was born around 1510 to Thomas Grey and Margaret Wotton. She married Thomas Audley, 1st Baron Audley of Walden, sometime between 1538 and 1540. She was his 2nd wife. About 1540, Elizabeth gave birth to their first child, a daughter, Margaret Audley. And then later, Elizabeth died in 1557. William Parr was born on August 14, 1514. He was brother to Henry VIII's last wife, Catherine Parr. He was the only son of Sir Thomas Parr. His father died when William was 4 years old and became a ward of Henry VIII. On April 23, 1543, he became a Knight of the Garter. On December 23, 1543, just after his sister had married the king, he was created Earl of Essex, a title held by his late father-in-law, the second Earl of Essex, who had died without a male issue in March 1540. In 1544, he joined the Privy Council, attending the first meeting on February 5, 1544. He served as the Lord Great Chamberlain from 1550 to 1553. He married 3 times and then died on October 28, 1571. Anne of Cleves was born in Dusseldorf, Germany in 1515. She was the daughter of John III, Duke of Cleves. In the autumn of 1539, Anne left her home to begin her journey to England to become Henry VIII's 4th wife. They married on January 6, 1540. Their marriage was formally annulled on July 9, 1540, and then she was granted the title of the king's sister. She never remarried and died on July 18, 1557. The ambassador's portrait is quite interesting because of the many Easter eggs that Holbein included in the portrait. To learn more about these men and the various symbols incorporated into this portrait, please check out my video on Symbols and Secrets in Holbein's 16th century paintings. I will have a link below in the description. William Butts was born in 1485 and was a physician to Henry VIII. This portrait is one of a pair with his wife Margaret Bacon, Lady Butts. In 1541, Holbein began the large group portrait King Henry VIII grants the charter to the barber surgeons, in which William Butts appears in the group of royal surgeons on the king's right side. This single portrait with his wife's companion piece was most likely painted between 1541 and 1543. Sir William then died in 1545. Sir William's wife Margaret was born Margaret Bacon, the daughter of John Bacon, around 1485. She served as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Mary and belonged to the circle of Queen Catherine Parr, the 6th wife of Henry VIII. She also died in 1545, the same year as her husband.
for checking out my YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more of my videos, please follow the links on the side of the page. Please select thumbs up that you like the video. It helps with the algorithm. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. And please click subscribe and ring the bell to be updated when new videos come out.